In this program, we are going to tackle another issue that people can't seem to accept.
In the gospel accounts, Jesus heals the sick, raises people from the dead, and performs all kinds of miracles.
The question that people have on their minds is this just a story? Is this something people just made up? Or is it fact?
The Gospel stories describe Jesus impressing his followers by performing supernatural feats, walking on water, turning water into wine, and feeding thousands of people with just a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. But most scholars we talk to think these stories were invented by the Gospel writers as advertisements for Christianity in its early years. In the first century, sick people were thought to be possessed by evil spirits.
Did Jesus really heal people?
The way I would discuss miracles with someone who adopts a rationalistic viewpoint is to try and get at why they believe miracles don't occur. More often than not, they simply say they just don't believe in them because they don't happen. From that point of view, I try and get behind how do you decide when something actually happens in history? What is your criteria for deciding when something happens? And to see if I can find a consistent worldview on their part. In my experience, I don't find one. They simply have already declared miracles off limits. In that case, you're going to have to find the conversation off limits as well. There's a forced dichotomy between the natural and the supernatural that was created at the time of David Hume and the other Enlightenment thinkers. You don't see any distinction between the natural and the supernatural in the Bible. You don't see those words. You see a difference between God acting and man acting, but that's not the same thing. Well, historians have certain ways of deciding when certain events that are recorded are deemed to be historical, and there's certain criteria they go by. The miracles of Jesus fit all these criteria. For example, they are attested to in multiple independent sources. The fact that Jesus could do miracles is attested not only in the Gospels, but also by pagan sources like the critic Celsus, who admitted that Jesus could do miracles even though he attributed his ability to being an Egyptian magician. We also find the same thing attested in the Jewish historian Josephus. He said that Jesus could work wonders, even though he didn't name specifics. Well, early critics of Christianity, like Celsus the pagan and like the Jewish rabbis, never denied that Jesus actually did miracles. It's only been in the past few hundred years with the Enlightenment that people have denied that Jesus could do miracles. The miracles also fit the criteria of coherence, which means they fit in with what we know of the historical Jesus otherwise. The fact that Jesus did miracles was a threat to the people who ran the temple apparatus, because they considered it their job to broker the relationship between the people and God. When Jesus stepped in doing miracles, he was saying, I'm taking the place of these people and I'm brokering the relationship between you and God. And so he was a threat to the priestly order, and of course they would want to get rid of him as soon as possible.
And when John had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him,
Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?
Jesus answered and said to them, Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me.
Note that Jesus is declaring himself to be the Messiah, the Son of God, by showing John the Baptist that specific prophecy is being fulfilled. Hundreds of years before, Isaiah wrote of the Messiah,
Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For water shall burst forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert.
At the time of John the Baptist, we have a number of different strands as far as what people expected the Messiah, but nearly all of them expected some kind of king or prophet or priest, and certainly one that had amazing abilities, such as healing, bringing sight to the blind, or raising the dead. There were different ideas as to when and how this would happen, but there's very little doubt that it was expected of the Messiah figure at some point. Well, in the Old Testament, God is considered the master of everything that is a part of man. He's considered the master of the eyes, the master of the ears, and so he is the one who would obviously be able to control these things and heal them. And that would have to be a mark of the Messiah, to be able to heal every part of man that has a sickness or infirmity within it.
When John the Baptist sent over his guys to see what was going on with Jesus, basically they had seen that he is indeed healing the sick, raising the dead. All the things that were prophesied in Isaiah were actually being fulfilled through Jesus.
This is one of the signs that people would recognize that the Messiah would perform miracles.
If he is the Son of God, then he has to perform miracles.
So once again, it's very similar to the question about the virgin birth. The question isn't about the miracles, it's about whether Jesus was who he claimed to be.